questions. Sean, would you like to verbalize your question?
Sorry, Rachel. Yeah, I was just remembering to unmute.
No
yeah,
problem.
so I'm the engineering manager of the plan team, so I didn't really have a stake in this. I was just reading the issues linked in the slides, and I found this sentence really interesting where you were talking about a use case where there may be a trust issue with the owner of the node. So I had two questions on that. Like, first of all, my assumption was that Geo was currently designed around the idea that you trust all the secondaries, although I haven't really introspected on what I mean by trust there. And secondly, do we have customers, we don't need to name them obviously, but do we have people already who are using Geo who have nodes that are not as trusted as other nodes?
I think trust might be I think I may have not chosen the best word there when I say a trust issue with the owner of the node. I think it is more around trusting the people that have administrator access of that node not to go and access the information in the database that they don't need to know to do their job. So for the example where they may have a consultancy with administrator access for whatever reason down to the database level, and because Geo replicates absolutely everything in the database, they may not trust that the administrators would not go down to the database level to find out certain user information that they might not necessarily need. So yes, so I think maybe trust is not the correct word there. But we don't actually have any situations at the moment where we have deployments where they're not trusted, if that makes sense. I think it's much more important to be thinking of it in terms of the legal ramifications of having data where it's not supposed to be.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
Sure. Christopher, would you like to verbalize your question?
Yeah, you mentioned calling out the collaboration and how that was positive. I'd just be curious if there was any generalities or things that we should learn from that, because oftentimes we focus on the things that didn't go well and how we should do it differently next time, but we don't focus on things that go well, and we should do it more consistently across the board.
For sure. Well, I think one of the things that went really well with that collaboration is that people were willing to ask questions and willing to provide really sensible and good, well thought out answers to that. I think sometimes a lot of assumption is made in terms of what people already understand or what people know who have access to. And we were essentially jumping into some of these conversations, not knowing everything about the minutiae, about how the different systems worked, and having people that are willing to explain things very clearly without getting frustrated is really key there. I think that's one of the most important takeaways that I've taken from a lot of the collaborative experiences we've been having lately. And also just having people willing to ask questions. That's really helpful.
Thanks, Rachel.
Sure. And Amanda, thank you for your comment. That is very kind. We've spent a lot of time on those two diagrams to try and make them as clear and as useful as possible, and I'm glad that you found them helpful. So are there any other questions on the call today?
Yes, Rachel, I have a question for you. So we recently went through a whole security assessment of Geo with a third-party firm, and I would like to get some of your thoughts as a stakeholder in that assessment about whether you think that process worked well, and if not, what could be improved next time.
I think what went well is that we were involved right from the point that we started talking to the firm. I enjoyed the fact that we were part of the scoping process there, and that we were able to call out if we thought the scope needed to be expanded or brought back. I also thought that what went very well was that when the results came in, I was very appreciative that the issues were raised for us with all of the information that was available in the report PDF. It made it very clear how the items needed to be addressed and what, how to clearly compartmentalize those pieces of work. So while that was already available on the PDF, I appreciated that the security team then made the issues for us. It just was one less step that we needed to do, and it just verified that we were going to be working on the correct things. because ultimately we're doing this to make the product more secure, but it's important to work well with the security team to get that in, or to get through that process. One of the things that I think could be slightly improved, but I think it's down to just capacity on the security team side, is I think that we have some issues that are now waiting for security review, but I think that there's some people on vacation, and as a result there's a little bit of a backlog there. And I totally understand people go on vacation, so I'm not saying I'm not asking for, I'm trying to I don't know quite how to say it, but yeah. I'm not putting pressure on people that take vacation at all, but we do have things that are now waiting in review, and we just want to make sure that those get released as soon as possible.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for that feedback. Let's work together and figure out, like, milestone-wise where we are with that and get that done as quickly as possible.
Perfect. No, we were very happy also that the security team were able to schedule that review so quickly, because we only highlighted in December that we would like to have this reviewed, and we've been able to have it reviewed in the following quarter, which I really appreciated. For others that are on the call who might not have the context, one of the reasons we were looking to have this review is so that we can enable this on GitLab.com, and we didn't want to enable something as invasive as Geo without having it properly approved by security. The last thing we want to do is release something that's insecure at this level.
Yeah, very helpful feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your support during the process as well, Kathy.
Rachel, can you tell a bit more about the security review? Does that mean that new features coming out have to undergo a security review, or is it reviewing before we use it on .com, or is it reviewing whether we successfully fix things that were identified? What kind of thing is this?
So this specific review was a review that I requested to happen before we released it onto GitLab.com. I didn't want to, I wanted to be confident that we were going to release something that didn't have any hidden vulnerability inside of that, since at the end of the day, this piece of software will be replicating every single piece of data off to another location. And I wanted to make sure that there was no known way of accessing that data while it's in transit. And all of the other vulnerabilities that third party was able to test for. But on a more broad level, any issue that comes up now that does have some security implication is required to go through a security review before the merge request. That's been a very good addition from the security team into the code review cycle and into the code review process. So there are certain issues outside of this review that the Geo team will have to have reviewed, and that's just part of the standard process going forward.
So these are people outside your team who have to review it?
Yes, that's right. These are people in Kathy's team that will perform that final review from a security, just with a security focus of it. So while we try to catch everything inside of the team, it's nice to have people that are focused on the security side of things, just looking for anything that we may have missed.
Is there a plan to get to security experts in the Geo team so you can do your own reviews?
That would be wonderful. I think there was talk of having some sort of stable counterpart, the same way that there's a stable counterpart with front-end UX, product management, etc. But I'm not sure how far discussions are with that. If we could have a stable counterpart for Geo, I'd be very happy.
Thanks for that. What makes the reliable fetcher reliable?
I need to double check, because it's been a couple of weeks since this has passed, and I can't remember all the details about how that is reliable, but I see Gabriel's unmuted. Yeah. He can provide some more information there.
Maybe I can answer that. Sidekick by default use Redis as data store, and whenever you ask for a job from Redis, it deletes from the queue. So if something goes wrong between the job is fetched from the queue and processed, there is a chance that you can lose the job. So with the reliable fetch, we use a different operation from Redis. So basically what we do is we move the job from one queue to a temporary queue, and that's an atomic operation. And we keep that there until the job is being processed. So if something goes wrong, we can recover that. That's basically it.
Cool. So move queue instead of delete queue.
Yeah.
I have a question about slide 3. I love the slide at the bottom. The arrows that are pointing towards Git, are the directions significant? I would have expected if it's Git push pull that there was an arrow in either side, but they seem to only go in one way.
Well, what we were trying to depict here is the fact that on a secondary, if you perform a Git push, that the push is accepted by the push proxy, and that is then proxied over to the primary node. That is what we were trying to depict in the bottom in the bottom section there. So on a secondary, the push, while it is accepted by the primary, it is being proxied there through the secondary.
I think that makes total sense. It's great that you show that, and I think that makes it much more understandable. I think you might want to consider you have git pull and push as the same block on the left and there's different blocks on the right. That might be confusing for people. Then either you have a dotted line where there's no arrow, or you have the arrows that are accurate. But right now, I think there's arrowheads that are not meant to relay anything. But it seems like that because you
Sure.
had it there.
Thank you for the feedback. We'll double check that and make the correction or figure out how to make that more understandable. Thank you for the feedback. Mark, I see you have the next question.
Yeah, so I see that setup and maintenance are focused for the next milestone, which is great. Can you comment on some of the kinds of things you're exploring there?
Sure. So some of the things that we're exploring are, as you would have seen on one of the slides, we do talk a little bit about service discovery and having an easy way to set up a complete cluster. So that's one of the things that we're looking at is how can we actually make it easy to install a secondary node in a clustered format without having to do a lot of configuration changes. One of the other things that we are exploring is that some customers have said it's difficult to promote a node from a secondary state to a primary state in a very easy way. And in a disaster situation, the last thing you want to do is be reading pages and pages of documentation and hoping that you're making all of the right changes. Ideally, you want to push a button and say this is primary. So we need to figure out from the background, how would you do that? How can we automate enough of these steps to make it easy for a customer to do that? And we're also just looking at some changes to the user interface to make it more understandable for what certain things do. There's a number of different aspects there, but ultimately we've had feedback that it's slightly cumbersome to install a cluster and it's not completely straightforward. So we want to just try and make all of those processes easier for our customers and for ourselves as well, since we'll be running that on GitLab.com soon.
Now, in this case, when you refer to cluster, you mean like primary, secondary cluster, not like a Kubernetes cluster. You mean an HA cluster.
Yes, that's right.
How easy is it to install Geo or HA in general? I've heard some other vendors have just like a one-click, set up secondary, and then just boom, it's just like one menu choice. Is it that easy?
Well, I think if you're using the omnibus install, it's pretty straightforward. I think as soon as you start making small changes to what is provided by default, it becomes more and more complicated. And I think in some scenarios you can be following, I think it was either 4 or 5 pages of instructions to make the changes that you need, and that's probably more instructions that we want people to be following to install something like this. In not so recent history, there was an issue about having one command to set up Geo per server, which is ideal, but that specific issue I think we've moved slightly past. So what we do want to focus on is just having a look at this idea of service discovery and how we could potentially utilize that. But as I said on the slide, one of the challenges we have is figuring out how to make this work for all customers, not just for a small subset of them. We need to make good choices so that it's something that can be used by all. I hope that answers your question.
Yep, thanks.
Great. Josh, you have the next question?
Yeah, I was just looking at the slide on the Geo in a bigger nutshell and was noticing the object storage transfers. I was just curious, are we transferring just the refs or like the contents of the buckets? I could sort of see two use cases where either one would be beneficial. Like if you're on S3 or GCS, maybe you only want to copy like the refs to object storage, like where they are, since it's already like geographically redundant and super durable. But if you're like on premise and you're using like an Atmos appliance or something like that, where it's like in a data center, you might actually want to copy all the contents of the object storage along. So I was just kind of curious with what actually happens in that transfer link.
As far as I understand, it's the refs that are transferred, but perhaps there's someone on the Geo team if I need to be corrected with that. If there's anyone on the Geo team who wants to correct me.
Yeah, maybe. For Git operations, we just use Git, and that works well. But for everything else, like attachment blobs and I don't know, page assets, etc. So there is a process that downloads from the secondary, pointing to the primary, and just do regular HTTP downloads. There is some authentications in between, but that's how we replicate that.
Are there actually like two buckets that are configured, like one like an object storage bucket for Europe and one for North America, and we then mirror it?
I'm not 100% sure how we are handling that with object storage, but if you're just using like the shared NFS setup, then that's how we do. Yeah, we just need to double check how we do for object storage, but the logic is the same.
So the current plan for supporting GitLab Pages is to rewrite it as a Rails app. What is GitLab Pages currently? Is it part of the main Rails app, or where is it?
It's currently a separate application written in Go.
Okay, wow. Normally we're rewriting Rails stuff in Go, but we're going the other way. That's not totally your turf, maybe, but do you know why?
At the time that comment was written, that was a week ago, and then in the middle of last week, another idea came up of leaving it in Rails, but making slight changes to it. I haven't gone into the details of that of the new proposal, but I do want to say on the call, though, I was very happy that Camille also put together a proof of concept of the new proposal. Unfortunately, I haven't gone into detail as to what the new proposal completely entails, but it looked like it was going to. Yeah, I'd have to go into more detail on that to be able to answer. But I see Darby's unmuted.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit on this. We have been kind of kicking around a number of different ideas for how to approach this. We did talk about rolling it into Rails, and then the latest proposal to keep it in Go and iterate from there. It feels like a more iterative approach, and so I think we're going to pursue that a little bit more and get a little more details on that. But we're still kind of open in the discussion to how we're going to approach this.
Cool, thanks. In the reliable fetcher, it says missing an event from the Redis queue can be crucial. I've always viewed Redis as something like it's not a disaster if it's if the events on Redis are lost. Like we're not doing a second-to-second backup, etc. Everyone gets locked out. It's bothersome. Some caching is lost, but it's not essential. And I thought the design from Geo was so that in the end, the database is a single source of truth, and you can just regenerate all those Sidekick events to make sure you play them back. But the part I quote here kind of makes me feel like that's no longer the case. So is Redis essential? Are we using that as a reliable database?
I can answer that. It's not essential. We just want to reduce the amount of time that you may be with inconsistent data because the job failed or something like that. So that can be perhaps 30 minutes or 10 hours, depending on how much bigger is your installation. So
yeah, so you just want to speed up that time to consistency. Okay, that makes sense, and I understand it correctly. Thanks.
Right. Are there any further questions today?
There's a lot of talk about geofencing things and making sure data only lives at one location. That's not really what we do with Geo. Geo, we have a central place where everything is, and then we can selectively sync at some point, which is great. Do you think there's a future where there's some stuff that lives in only in location A, and some stuff that only lives in location B? I don't see that with the current Geo design, but I was wondering whether people have ideas.
Well, that seems to be a customer request to have a feature like that. But I think that is not exactly how Geo is being built at the moment. Geo has been built at the moment relying on streaming replication from Postgres, which essentially copies everything from one location to another. Even if we consider selectively syncing projects by namespace or by shard, we're still looking at taking the entire database along with it. Because customers are interested in having projects only in location A or only in location B, I think it is something that we need to look at as to how we would support something like that. But we would need to, there might be a fundamental change that has to happen for us to actually be able to implement that. As to what that fundamental change is, I'm not quite sure, but we couldn't rely on streaming replication anymore.
Is that other customers, like because not every, like some part is in the database, which is like monolithic or is atomic, or you have to stream as a whole, and some of it is the actual code. Are there customers interested in geofencing their Git repositories only and not caring less about the database?
I think there are some customers that are interested in primarily in the Git repository, but also the issue information connected to why the code changes were made. And there is one particular customer who's also only interested in having the user information, so the GitLab users only existing on specific nodes. So a user on node A wouldn't have a user profile on node B, for example.
Yeah, I think like the technical changes we have to do to do the database, split up the database, are like an order of magnitude more than what we have to do to split up the Git repo. So I wonder what the relative demand is there. And is there an issue where we're collecting user feedback about this? Or?
I'm collecting user feedback in a separate doc. I need to figure out how to take that document and make it into an issue without exposing user information, which is an action that I do have for that at the moment. But it is interesting what you say about relative need for the different features, because because of how much of a shift it would have to be on the database side. But I do know for selective sync, we could do that on a per project basis at the moment. It's just not a straightforward thing to do. You would have to set up your sharding correctly or set up the namespaces correctly to be able to take only one project over instead of all the projects. So we do have an open issue to update the documentation for how you could do that, even though it's not straightforward right now. And then another issue to actually make it straightforward, because I think that would satisfy the majority of customer requests for this.
Yeah, there's kind of an evolution: selective sync, geofencing Git, geofencing everything, which might be in the so far future. We'll never get to it, but we'll see. Thanks for the context.
Sure. And yes, just a last point on that, we do want to iterate towards that. So that's why we want to improve the documentation that's there for how you would do this, then actually make it easier, and then go in and look at how we would make that fundamental change if it's even possible. Right, are there any further questions today? But well, I see there are no further questions coming up, so I just wanted to thank you all very much for your time, and also thank you, Gabriel, for jumping in and answering some of the geo-specific questions today.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you very much. Bye.